thought the darkness hid their hands. They believed secrecy was power, that as long as no one could see the strings they pulled, the world would bend to their control. They underestimated you. They forgot that your eyes had already adjusted to the dark. You watched quietly, never interrupting, never exposing them too soon. That is why your ladder cut deeper than any confrontation. You weren't surprised by their plots. You had already mapped them out. You let them dance, let them tie their own knots, let them feel clever while you studied. And when the moment came, your knowing smile was the sharpest weapon of all, because it told them one truth. They were never in control. People who pull strings in the shadows thrive on the illusion of superiority. They think manipulation makes them untouchable. Yet the psychology of control is always fragile. Those who manipulate most are often the most insecure. They need the comfort of strings because they cannot stand without them. You saw through that. You recognized that anyone who hides in the dark is already afraid of the light. And so you let them work. Let them whisper, let them weave. Your silence became unbearable because it forced them to realize that their efforts were not hidden. They were transparent. Your laughter was not mockery, it was revelation. In relationships, manipulators believe they can keep you small. They nudge, guilt, or gaslight, thinking you'll bend without noticing. They forget that once you catch the rhythm of manipulation, it loses all its power. You learn that you don't need to fight someone who plays in shadows. You just need to refuse to step into their stage. Your refusal to collapse under their tricks made their efforts meaningless. They tried to confuse you, but you saw clarity in their repetition. They thought they were playing chess while you were blindfolded. But you built the board, and you laughed because you never once played their game. In self-growth, the strings pulled against you show up as doubt and distraction. People plot to keep you in place because your growth makes them uncomfortable. They whisper, slow down, or you're doing too much, thinking those words will poison your momentum. But you laughed because you understood. Their words were not wisdom, they were fear. They feared what your growth meant for their own stagnation. And so you didn't shrink. You kept building, each step forward tightening the strings around their necks. Because the more you grew, the more obvious their attempts to control became. And the more obvious it became, the less power it held. You see, the darkness always exaggerates fear. They count on that. They expect you to panic, to believe shadows hold monsters. But you trained your mind to stay still in the dark, to watch carefully, to listen more than you spoke. That gave you vision they didn't expect. The very place they thought would protect them became the place you learned to dominate. You laughed because they were convinced you were blind, when in truth, you were observing with perfect clarity. Their mistake was assuming silence equals ignorance. Silence was your strategy, and knowledge was your weapon. Those who pull strings rarely consider the endgame. They are addicted to the short-term thrill of influence. They celebrate every small reaction they provoke, thinking it proves their power. You never gave them that satisfaction. You didn't collapse, didn't rage, didn't beg, and in denying them reaction, you starved their addiction. That's why they're unsettled. They realized all their work in the shadows produced nothing. And the nothing was louder than any explosion could have been. Your laughter became unbearable because it was the sound of someone who was never trapped, never controlled, never fooled. The psychology of laughter itself broke them. People fear ridicule more than confrontation. By laughing, you showed them how small their games truly were. You showed them that the entire show they orchestrated was a comedy, not a tragedy. That laughter stripped their dignity because it revealed the truth. They weren't dangerous masterminds. They were clowns juggling fragile lies in the dark. They tried to choreograph your downfall. Instead, they became entertainment in your story of resilience. That shift of power was final, because nothing ruins a manipulator faster than being exposed as a fool. Your march forward through their schemes proved something greater. You don't need to destroy people who plot in the dark. You only need to outlast them. Eventually, their strings tangle. Eventually, their lies contradict. Eventually, their masks slip. And when that moment comes, the world doesn't remember their manipulations. They remember how you stood through it all, unshaken. The manipulators become your evidence, your proof, your living testimony. Every string they pulled is now tied to the fact that you rose despite it. And that is why they stay speechless when you laugh. They will never admit it, but your laughter scared them. It told them you had seen every trick, that nothing was hidden, that their shadows had no secrets left. They realized you were steps ahead, not behind. That knowledge destroyed the illusion they tried to build. Because control is only powerful when the other side believes in it. You stopped believing, and their empire collapsed in silence. They wanted you broken. Instead, you walked through their designs with ease, laughing, sharper, freer, and more dangerous than ever before. They assumed their plotting would corner you. They thought if they pulled enough strings, whispered enough lies, and created enough noise, you would be trapped with no room to breathe. They wanted to shrink your options, box you into a small space where panic would eat away at your strength. That was their strategy, to force you into reaction, to make you move recklessly so they could call it collapse. But you didn't panic. You didn't lose yourself to the walls they built. Instead, you studied them. You realized that the corner they tried to trap you in was never a prison, it was a vantage point. From there, you could see every move, every face, every flaw in their design. They mistook their plotting for power, but what they really did was give you clarity. In their minds, control meant surrounding you with pressure. They assumed the weight would crush you, but you didn't fight the weight, you carried it. You understood something they never did: pressure sharpens the mind, and clarity thrives under intensity. They thought the corner was an ending, but it became the forge. You turned their attempt at confinement into a lesson in patience. A corner isn't a trap for someone who knows how to stand still, observe, and wait for the right moment to strike. They couldn't predict that your silence was not surrender. It was the calm before the inevitable shift that left them exposed. Relationships reveal this more than anything. Manipulators assume that by plotting against your trust, by creating false narratives, they can corner you emotionally. They want you to beg, to prove yourself, to drown in their accusations. But you learned that real strength is not in reacting, but in refusing. When they cornered you with betrayal, you didn't plead, you walked away. They saw that you would rather stand alone than be trapped by lies. That single decision broke their hold completely. Because nothing disarms those who plot like realizing the corner they built is empty once you step out of it. In self-growth, their plotting often comes in the form of doubts. They spread words like poison, telling you that you can't, that you shouldn't, that you won't make it. They hope the repetition corners you into giving up on yourself. But you use those doubts as markers, each one reminding you exactly where they didn't want you to go. Every attempt to box you in became a signpost pointing toward where your power lived. They assumed their plotting would discourage you. Instead, it became fuel, turning their negativity into the very proof you needed to push further. The psychology of plotting always reveals desperation. People don't plot against those they see as weak. They plot because your presence disturbs them, because your resilience reminds them of what they lack. They corner you because they fear what you'll do with freedom. But fear always exposes itself. You saw through it. You recognized that their need to trap you was never about you. It was about them not being able to compete with your growth. And once you understood that, their walls stopped feeling solid. They looked like paper barriers waiting for a single step to collapse them. They tried to corner you by turning others against you. They thought isolating you would break your spirit. But what they forgot is that solitude is where resilience grows strongest. You didn't collapse in isolation. You built yourself there. You let the silence feed your focus. While they wasted energy weaving lies, you turned the distance into discipline. When you returned, you weren't the same. You came back sharper, harder to read, harder to break. Their plotting had unintentionally created the version of you they feared most. Corners are supposed to feel final. That's why they used them. They assumed once you were surrounded, the story was over. But you showed them that corners are illusions. Corners only trap those who forget they can climb. You didn't fight within their box. You rose above it. That's why they remained speechless. They designed a cage and realized it had no roof. You didn't just escape. You left them staring at the empty space where they thought you'd remain. Their plotting was loud in the dark, But silence came when you refused to fall. They had written your downfall in their minds, rehearsed how it would look, how it would feel. But their script never played out, because you refused to give them the performance they wanted, and the absence of collapse left them lost. They had no words, no backup plan, no way to spin the truth. Their plotting became a monument to their failure. Your endurance became the proof of your strength. You marched out of the corner they built without hesitation, and that is what destroyed them most. They thought you would be too broken to move, too exhausted to fight, but you left with composure, with clarity, with calm. They wanted chaos. You gave them control, your control, not theirs. And when you walked free, they finally realized the truth. The corner was never yours, it was theirs. They had trapped themselves in the belief that you could be caged. They gather in whispers, thin voices hiding behind loud gestures, pleading with anyone who will listen to break you open and spill you on the floor. They think exposure is a weapon with one blade. They think your silence is a vault they can crack with gossip and recycled courage. They think you are a mystery that will dissolve under fluorescent light and cheap microphones. You smile because you carry a different secret. You know everything. Not in the bragging way, in the earned way, in the way of a person who has walked through every corridor of their own life with the lights on. You have read your unflattering chapters. You have counted your missteps and refused to disguise them as fate. You took inventory in the long hours when all performances fall away and only truth stays awake. That is why you do not tremble. They are begging for an expose while you are seated inside your own transparency. A hunter cannot wound a mirror that admits its shape. You are not flinch. You are not theater. You are the full record, held calmly, page by page, with no need to tear a single sheet. They hire rumor like a failing lawyer. They borrow rage they do not own and hand it to amateurs with shaky hands. You watch them draft their case against you with recycled ink, and forget that a case only stands when the defendant is hiding. You are not hiding. You made a habit of confession to yourself before the world could demand it. You did not wait for a crowd to learn the name of your fear. You learned it in private and taught it to behave. That is the difference no speech can erase. They want to reveal a tear in a fabric you have already stitched. They want to prove a weakness you have already trained into strength. They think you fear the light. You understand how to turn lamps into windows. There is no panic in eyes that have seen their own night and survived. The show they are planning cannot sell tickets when the ending is already known to the one they hope to destroy. They walk toward your door with headlines in their pockets. You open the door and offer them tea. Exposure loses its teeth when the room it enters has nothing to hide.